Welcome back. I hope everyone enjoyed lunch and was able to catch up on your emails. I know I was able to.
We have a very busy afternoon of panels and a keynote followed by more content sessions to end our day. Our first session is the KultureCity panel. The title is How Sensory and Inclusive Technology Supports Workplace Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Following that, we're going to celebrate our finalists and winners for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leadership Awards.
And then we will hear from Keith Ferrazzi, the New York Times best-selling author of Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back, and Leading Without Authority.
Then we'll close out the main stage session with a panel discussion about social justice and equity. Please welcome LaShaun Solomon, Global Marketing Manager of NBCUniversal, to introduce our next panel.
Hello, I'm LaShaun Solomon, Marketing Manager of Ad Sales and Partnerships at NBCUniversal. I also serve on the TAG DE&I Society as the Digital Marketing Director. I am thrilled to be your moderator for this upcoming panel on how sensory and inclusive technology supports workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm joined today with a stellar panel of guests to dive into this topic, starting with Dr. Julian Maha, founder and CEO of KultureCity. KultureCity is the nation's leading nonprofit on sensory accessibility and acceptance for those with invisible disabilities. With a Doctor of Medicine from the University of Calgary, Dr. Maha is an experienced founder with a demonstrated history of working in the nonprofit organization management industry, skilled in healthcare, information technology, and healthcare management. Next, we have Andrew Wyatt, founder, president, and CEO of Purpose Public Relations Group. Andrew has overseen the rapid growth of the PR firm as well as provided public relations and crisis management strategies for AT&T, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Birmingham, Alabama, Lionsgate Entertainment Corporation, Stars, Robin Givens, Dominique Wilkins, and countless other iconic figures and entertainment subsidiaries. Our third scheduled panelist, Dominique Wilkins, was unable to join us today and sends his apologies. Dr. Maha and Andrew, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Now, are you ready to dive into our discussion?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, let's start by level setting for our virtual audience on what sensory inclusion is. Dr. Maha, would you like to kick us off with the definition of sensory inclusion and how you founded KultureCity supporting this very important cause?
Yeah, definitely, and thanks again for having us. I think before I begin to dive into the definition of sensory inclusion, I think the key is to kind of break down the numbers of what we're dealing with and what sensory needs are. I think one of the biggest things that we fail to realize is that currently, according to the CDC, there are more than 1 in 4 individuals in the US living with some sort of a sensory need or an invisible disability. And this could be anyone from PTSD, PTSI, autism spectrum disorder, to dementia, to strokes, to mental health challenges. And I think this is such a growing population that it's very important to figure out how best to integrate these individuals into our communities, our workspaces, and really into our worlds. For most of these individuals, when they go into a public setting, be it an arena, a workplace, things that we take for granted, like the lights, the noises, things of that nature, are not only overwhelming to them, but also physically painful. So because of that, a lot of these individuals fail to engage because of the fact that they feel as though they're ostracized and really isolated when they should be included and accepted. And that's really what sensory inclusion is. It's the ability to change that narrative, that culture per se of how these individuals have been looked at in our communities, embrace them and include them through this banner of sensory inclusion. And that was really the genesis of founding of KultureCity. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Dr. Maha, thank you so much for that thorough explanation. Now, can you talk a little bit about the misconceptions that people may have when it comes to sensory inclusion?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that, I think the number one thing is that we hear a lot is if that person has a sensory issue, why are they engaging? Why are they going to, let's say, a sporting arena where it might be too loud, things of that nature? And the question is that shouldn't mitigate them or prevent them from having to interact. I think they should still be embraced if they want to go there, not avoid it. And it's akin to someone with a physical disability. If they're in a wheelchair and there's no accessibility there, should they avoid going to said place? No, they should figure out a way to get there. And it's our job as a community to get them to that location and integrate them.
You raised such a good point there. Like, regardless of what your needs are, what your current state is, you have just as every right to enjoy sporting events and entertainment just like everybody else. So
Exactly.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Dr. Maha.
Yeah.
Now, Andrew, when I read your background, I learned that you and I actually share a similar background in working in media and entertainment.
Right, definitely.
So, I learned that you spent 12 years in the broadcast television business.
Correct.
So I would love for you to share a little bit more with our virtual audience, how you found yourself connected with supporting sensory inclusion.
Well, look, working in the business and seeing how the media, as vast the media is, they don't have an understanding of the disabilities that are out here. And meeting Dr. Maha, I saw that sometimes we can't identify a person who has a sensory disability. We might think that person has something wrong with them, but we don't know, especially in the Black and brown communities of today. And we, as a kid growing up, I watched how people in my family always say, oh, that's just the crazy uncle that lives upstairs. Not realizing that uncle has a sensory disability, but they didn't want to be shunned or looked at up as being different or strange, or they're a sick family. So they took that person to the church. They said, well, it might be the devil might be in and baptize him or her and that kind of stuff. And I started understanding more and more that has plagued us as a people, because when we see these shootings that happen every day by some bad law enforcement officers, we understand that many of these people have issues. They just don't know how to recognize the issues. And what KultureCity has been able to do with Dr. Maha and his wife, Michelle Kong, they created this movement. And this is this movement that needs the media push behind it and need the mass movement of the media, the technology, to show that this person could look normal, but they could be going through something. And it's bigger than just sensory. It's about physical disabilities, as Dr. Maha said. My client who I represent now, Bill Cosby, he's blind. 100% blind due to glaucoma. That's a disability. But people look at an individual and say, well, if they got a dog, they probably could see a little bit, or they have a stick going, they could see a little bit, they could see you and me. No, we have to educate people on how to deal with people with disabilities in general. But sensory disabilities, we had an opportunity to work with this young man, Matthew Russian, a young kid out of Virginia Beach, Virginia, who went out for desserts at 19 years old. He has a seizure under the wheel. And he hits two cars. The second car, the guy ends up a paraplegic. He has a form of autism called echolalia. The officer said, you tried to kill yourself? I tried to kill myself. I tried to kill myself. They sentenced this young man to 50 years in prison. 50 years. 50 years in prison, 19 years old. Mom and dad both work for the Department of Defense. But KultureCity got involved. The family got in touch with me, and they said, nobody knows his story. Nobody knows his story. The mother didn't know who I was, Laverne Russian. I didn't tell her who I was, but I put her on every major network. And Matthew was given a conditional pardon this year, March, and he walked out of prison. But because of that disability and having seizures in prison and not awarding him the type of medical attention, he started going blind. That's why KultureCity is so powerful. And that's why I feel that my firm, Purpose PR firm, I'm not in this for the money, I'm in this for the movement. the movement of change and the movement to show the change that it affects all communities, but to tell people in the Black and brown communities, don't be afraid of this stigma. Don't be afraid of saying that I have a child with a disability or a sensory disability. Let's get them the proper help because they can advance and become productive citizens. And that's what Culture City is about. It's not just about Culture City, it's about culture citizens. And we're creating good citizens.
Wow. All I can say, I wish I had my notepad because I have so many notes just from that. So creating culture citizens and being able to recognize that we have to think beyond the assumptions, right?
Correct.
We can't just assume what people's capabilities are based off of how they look.
Right.
Because everybody has their own story.
We all have a disability. We all have something different about us. That's what makes us so unique, that we're all different. But it's embracing those differences and saying, hey, accepting them and letting that person be great. And that's what Culture City and Culture Citizens, and what they're creating, these Culture Citizens, teaching people how to be great and how to be productive citizens and live productive lives.
Wow. Well, the second part of our question is going to dive a little bit deeper into creating those perfect and great culture citizens, so hold on.
Great.
So let's see. Andrew, if you had a high-profile client with sensory needs, how would you coach them in navigating that?
Simple. Just be themselves. Don't try to be different. Don't try to emulate someone. Don't try to walk different. Show your uniqueness. And I guarantee you it's going to be something so unique about you that people are going to want to emulate you.
I like that. There's this saying called, you might as well be yourself because everybody else is taken.
Right.
Something like that?
Right. And everything is out here. Everything out here is taken. So just be you. You have nothing to prove. I think what social media has done, I've never been on social media, never had a social media page. And I always said social media was created to take people away from current events of the day, to take you from being real. It takes that real person away and gives this facade of something that's not real. And that's the same thing with a person, with Bill Cosby. He's blind. Danny Glover has epilepsy. He came into the culture ball, and people don't know he has epilepsy, but he deals with it quite well. He has dyslexia. He reads slow, Danny Glover does. He reads scripts slow. Nobody knows that. But when he walks in a room, he's himself. And it's all about being you and loving you and appreciating you and not letting a post define who and what you should be and how you should conduct yourselves.
Wow. Very powerful. And I hope everyone is picking up all of that in our virtual audience. So let's now talk a little bit more about how you would advise someone on communicating their sensory needs to their current or future employer. And this is open to you as well as Dr. Maha.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is kind of what you alluded to. I think it's for them to be honest and be truthful and to be themselves. But I think the fundamental thing, and I think that's kind of what we're doing with Culture City, is getting the general public engaged and present in this matter. Because, right now you see a lot of big pushes on hiring individuals, particularly in the autism spectrum. But what you don't see is the workplace and everyone else in the workplace being trained to understand these individuals that are going to be hired better. Because if you fail to do that, there is going to be a disconnect, and it's a setup for failure because they are not put in the situation for them to shine. But if their co-workers around them understand, empathize, and see why they do things in a particular way, why they might find meetings boring or, be very truthful to a fault, it's because of their underlying neurodiversity issue, and it's not because they're trying to be rude and all that. That creates that perfect environment for them to thrive in, and their co-workers to also understand them and better utilize them in the space that they're in. And I think that's the fundamental key. I think to be honest and open about it, but also encourage the co-workers and the workspaces to be trained to better understand this whole issue.
And I think to add on to what Dr. Maha said, they're already doing it. They're in over 800 venues, their logo. They're in NBA arenas, NFL stadiums, Major League Baseball stadiums. On August 3rd, Culture City did a press conference with Governor Kay Ivey of Alabama where they trained all of the state troopers and certify them to deal with sensory disabilities. And on every Alabama State Trooper car, you will see the KultureCity logo. Salt Lake City, Utah, they work with Joe Ingles, I think, with the Utah Jazz, and trained all the first responders, certified them and police officers on how to deal with people with sensory disabilities, mental disabilities, and all types of disabilities, and have saved lives. So I think they're into the workspace. This week, we will be in Chicago, meeting with the CEO and president of United Airlines, talking to them about training their entire staff on how to deal with people with sensory disabilities, because we see so many news stories about people being kicked off planes, but we don't know what's wrong. And maybe the flight attendants don't know how to identify that there's a problem.
Right.
And so I think we're already there in that workspace. We're getting there, and but they're doing a phenomenal job, and that's why I love being around KultureCity.
Well, that is amazing. And I've read so many great things about KultureCity, and you touched on how KultureCity has impacted so many different entertainment venues. And I was actually going to bring that up because I believe in 2019, State Farm Arena was awarded for the Sensory Inclusion Room. So could you tell us a little bit more about what was the vetting process in identifying those winning arenas? What classifications went into place into identifying the State Farm Arena as best in class?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there was a couple things. I think the biggest thing is obviously public feedback from families who have gone through the process, or individuals who have to use all those different modifications that the different arenas provided. Number two is how good the arena is actually pushing out the messaging. And number three, as a whole, the model of how they're accommodating and accepting this initiative. And with State Farm, I think in particular, they had a phenomenal Chief of Diversity Officer, Zing Shaw, who did such a great job in really embracing this and really getting the owner buy-in. So, Tony Resler and Jamie Gertz not only embrace the initiative, but at every game, they have a video that plays that tells the fans about the initiative. And I think those two coupled, the power of Zing and the power of ownership really kind of created this perfect confluence of events that a lot of individuals in the Atlanta area, when they were going to the game, could benefit. And a lot of people were able to go to the game for the first time. And I think that was why, kind of what made them that 2019 winner.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Just think about someone being able to experience their first basketball game and not feel out of place and to not feel uncomfortable and to act like just a regular fan.
Yeah, it's
like
powerful.
Everybody else.
Right.
It's very, very powerful on different levels because, so our tagline in KultureCity is that we make the nevers possible. Because, throughout a lot of these lives, like my son, is 14 on the spectrum, and he's been told never multiple times. He was told he would never ride a horse independently. And about 2 weeks ago, he competed in his first typical horse showing, and placed in it. No one knew he was any different from any other child. And I think that's the power of creating opportunity. But opportunity only can be created if we as a general community start to understand that this is an issue, but it's a very easy issue to fix because it's what makes us human. It's that ability to connect with one another, and all that begins is a place of empathy and understanding. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about how companies, how can companies improve their hiring processes to be more inclusive for those who are neurodiverse?
Yeah, I think number one, it starts off with understanding what you're hiring, why you're hiring, and why it's so important, right? I think the two is to understand that they might not interview the typical way. And then what kind of workplace modifications that you could need to change and all that. And I think on top of the biggest thing with all this is that what is the PR push from it? I think Andrew can allude to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the PR push is simple, partnerships with the media to talk about these issues and to highlight these issues and to understand the purpose. The purpose of this person. Believe it or not, when you meet some of these people dealing with these sensory disabilities or disabilities as a whole, they're creative in their own right. They could bring some really unique ideas and unique ways of using a computer, unique ways of running a camera that we see in front of us, unique ways of social media on how to deal with people just like them because they have their own language. And I think that's companies, if they really want to grow, you go outside of your comfort zone. And I think so many companies today and just individuals in general, we become so comfortable with that little zone that we live in, that bubble.
Yeah.
And with COVID now, we're definitely in that bubble, right? So it's now that we have to retrain ourselves now because of the pandemic, how to work outside the bubble, how to keep our relationships going outside of the bubble now and not be so fearful. And I think that's what companies have to do. They cannot be fearful because they don't have the privilege of being fearful of people with disabilities.
100% agree. I think if anything positive that may have arisen out of the pandemic is the fact that companies and individuals have been forced to think innovatively.
Right. Right.
We have to. We had to figure out how to utilize the Zooms and the Teams and Skypes in order to continue to do business. And now more than ever, when you think about social unrest, companies have to be mindful. How are they showing up? How are they representing the causes that are important to their consumers?
Correct.
So completely agree there. So let's talk a little bit more about, and Dr. Maha, you spoke to this earlier as far as like the different questions that you would ask a neurodiverse candidate. So how can a hiring manager be more thoughtful and be inclusive when they are interviewing different candidates?
Yeah, I think preparation, number one, understanding that you are interviewing a neurodiverse candidate. You know, sometimes it's good to send them questions beforehand. Obviously, the interview process is always been more like you want to see on the spot what someone comes up with. But that's not necessarily a strength that someone from the neurodiverse community might have. They do like to plan things out a little bit more ahead. So giving them the questions beforehand is a key. Giving them time to answer. You know, helping also to understand that some of their responses, like, you know, they might not comprehend certain things, you know, and because they take things very concrete, they prefer concrete statements to more abstract statements. So I think developing all that and understanding that within interview techniques are going to be fundamental key.
I think something that's unique that companies should think about doing is saying, hey, okay, for you, you might work 3 days in the company. And the other 2 are at home, in your own space. So they're not so overwhelmed. They're not pressured because they're not pressured to get to work every day. You're not limiting them. You're just doing exactly what we did with COVID.
Right.
You know, we're using technology. We have it to a science now. We could do interview from anywhere. We could have a conversation from anywhere in the world now. So, you know, do you always need the manpower on the inside? Look, it saves you more money when it comes to heating and cooling the building and electricity bills. So at the end of the day, find some unique ways of saying, you know what, I'm going to limit your work hours. I like you. You serve a purpose. And I'm going to limit your work hours to where you work 3 days a week and 2 days from home.
That is so relevant because when we, in the space of sensory needs and those that identify as being neurodiverse, a simple commute can be extremely stressful between the traffic or if they are navigating public transportation and all those different nuances and different impacts that can impact them before they even get to work. So that's a really good point.
Well, imagine if we go back in time and we find some renowned researchers to just research all of the road rage that happened over America. How many of those individuals were dealing with some type of sensory disability? Think about it. That can help improve a lot of things on how we operate in life because, you know, just Atlanta traffic alone would drive you crazy. So, you know, having to leave at 5 in the morning to get to work at 8, you know, is tough. And imagine you're trying to, if you have a disability, you're trying to pick out the right colors to wear. And it's just the little things that we take for granted that means so much to those individuals.
And I think one of the other things that kind of COVID has taught us is the fact that before COVID, the sense of isolation is something not many of us could understand. But after COVID, I think everyone understands how difficult it is for us to be alone and not have that proximity of someone else. But that's what someone with a disability, invisible or visible or sensory need, goes through on a daily basis. That's their life. And the challenge was always, how do you scale that so that the general public understands? But I think if there is a gift of COVID, that was one of the gifts where now everyone understands that isolation is not how we are supposed to be in the human state. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about the onboarding process. We've talked about different best practices that hiring managers can do, what companies can do when they're assessing neurodiverse talent. But once they actually extend that offer and that person accepts, what should the onboarding process look like for them to set them up for success?
I think the biggest thing is to make sure that everyone around them understands why they do what they do, certain things, why they have certain concessions and things of that nature. I think that's number one, because if the people around them don't understand that this particular individual has certain particular quirks or needs in how they operate, then that's going to set them up for failure. And then I think the flip side then will be to look at the individual to see if they are coming into the office, what are certain things that needs to be potentially adjusted from them so that they can have that success. Do they need to move around more in their space? You know, if they attend a meeting, are they, do they need to have a special concession on maybe some fidgets, things of that nature? Does noise aggravate them? Does fluorescent lighting aggravate them? I think to understand all that is going to be key of success.
And I think in order for any of us to be successful in our fields, even in your field, there's conferences you have to go to. You might hit an NABJ conference or something to learn what's new out here, or to learn how to interview a certain way. Maybe there's a new style. So there's nothing wrong with being retrained. And I think what companies should always do is say, you know what, let's retrain all our employees, because we have something new we're doing here now. So if a person with a sensory disability or with a disability, they scream out loud, you don't chuckle, okay, or you don't start whispering to your coworker or isolate yourself from that person, because then you're creating a bigger problem within that person that's not needed at all.
Right.
I think that's it. You take the time to retrain, because it's going to save you money in the long run. And that's at the end of the day, every corporation's they're looking at how to save money.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, let's talk about the money.
Right.
Yes.
And managing that bottom line.
Right.
And to the point, we all should be empowered to be perpetual learners, because things are going to continue to evolve, and we must manage that pace as well with ourselves. So let's talk about mentoring options. You join a company, you're brand new, you have these unique capabilities that you have shared with your team, and you're managing the workplace. What recommendations do you have in identifying mentors?
I think someone that empathizes and understands. I think that's going to be the key. Maybe someone who has a family member or someone who has sensory needs themselves. I think that's always going to be the key, but the key is going to be empathy. Someone that empathizes, that's going to help them navigate the challenges of the workspace.
And also, and not looking for a mentor to always be a famous person. We always try to say, let's, go to the Miracle Network and all these different organizations that provide mentors to people. It's right in your backyard.
Right.
It could be a parent who has a child with a sensory disability. It could be a person who suffers from that themselves who can be a mentor. But we always want to go to a big name to say, let me get this person. They're not always accessible. And sometimes that person might need an individual that they can call every day or 3 times a week.
You touched on so many great points there, and I wish we had more time to dive in, but we are wrapping up our panel now. So again, to our audience, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Dr. Julian, Maha, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights and gifts. And again, my name is LaShaun Solomon. Thank you for joining today, and I hope you continue to enjoy the Converge 2021 conference.
Thank you.
It was interesting in talking to the kids today. The first question asked you, as well as the last question, had to do with race, with color. Did that work for you or against you in the early years?
I suspect it worked both against me and for me. I think in some cases, people may have had lower expectations of me because I was black and because of their own prejudices. And in other cases, people, whether I performed up to standards or not, were going to put me down because I was black. So I suspect it both helped me and hurt me. It was an advantage and a disadvantage.
I also feel especially proud to be standing here where some years ago Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella proved the way and made it possible for Frank and me and for other blacks hopeful in baseball. They proved to the world that a man's ability is limited only by his lack of opportunity.
And I thought, my God, this man is thinking that we're not human beings. And I made up my mind that I could not afford the luxury of just being an actress, and that I would use my career as my platform.
I try to look at this event through the lens of the evolution in this country, of the idea who in our country are the people who have constitutional rights and constitutional responsibilities, and the evolution of the expansion of that.
I used a plain geometry book in 1951 that had been used by a white student in 1935. But we, Maynard, and so many of us, did not let that deter us from going to college, going to law school, and coming back home to participate in the leadership and to bring change to our hometown.
So the way I look at it, if our youth don't win, I don't win. If I don't come back and bring my gold and my experiences and my knowledge back to the very same community that made me, then what is it all for?
The Technology Association of Georgia is committed to being a catalyst of social justice and equity by adopting key principles to guide our member services and program offerings, ensuring that diverse groups are extended the basic human right to feel welcomed and have equitable access to resources and opportunities. Because of TAG's collective knowledge and expansive relationships in the tech sector across the state, we will advance social justice for people of color in the workplace in the following ways. Ensure Black tech entrepreneurs participate fully and equitably in Georgia's growth economy with unimpeded access to resources and opportunities equivalent to non-Black entrepreneurs. Ensure the tech industry workforce in Georgia reflects the overall available workforce, with Blacks proportionately represented in the tech industry. Ensure that Black tech professionals advance into managerial and senior leadership positions, achieving representation in these ranks commensurate to their demographic representation.
Every year, we recognize and celebrate the inclusive technology community throughout Georgia. TAG's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leadership Awards are committed to honoring those companies and individuals who have demonstrated exceptional efforts to advance diversity and inclusion within their organizations. They embrace the excellence of all employees and achieve positive outcomes in both the workplace and the community. The award categories this year include DE&I Emerging Technology Leader of the Year, DE&I Tech Impact Leader of the Year, Inclusive Technology Leadership Award. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Scott McMichael, President of Improving. He'll give out the awards. This award recognizes a rising leader in a Georgia organization.
To recognize and to celebrate with those who are leading out in this area of inclusion and diversity within their respective organizations. Improving provides technology consulting, software engineering, and the training and coaching to support it through our presence in 15 offices throughout North America. It is our ambition to change the perception of the IT profession, and we aspire to make every interaction with an improver one that is helpful, that is generous, solution-oriented, and one that is innovative and open to new ideas. It is our promise to cultivate environments based on trust. This means celebrating our successes as much as we learn from our failures. And it is our commitment to creating a great place to work for all of our improvers, which is why Improving is delighted to partner with TAG in supporting Converge and celebrating today's nominees. Our first award category is Inclusive Technology Leadership. This award recognizes a company with a program or project that promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion in technology. Our finalists are Elevon and Pyramid Consulting Incorporated. And the winner is Pyramid Consulting Incorporated. The next award category is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Emerging Tech Leader of the Year. This award recognizes rising leaders in Georgia organizations who demonstrate leadership in diversity, equity, and inclusion technology programs and projects. Our finalists are Colin Reedy, Accenture, Ariel Perez, Cox Enterprises, and LaShaun Solomon, NBCUniversal. And the winner is Colin Reedy, Accenture. Please welcome to the stage Sharita with the Coca-Cola Company. Sharita?
The Coca-Cola Company is honored to be a Converge corporate sponsor. Cultivating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace is a strategic business priority that fuels greater creativity throughout the Coca-Cola Company. The conversations we're having today need to continue to happen in order to further advancement of this important work through consistent, measurable outcomes that will have an impact on our communities. The amazing work that has been evidenced so far today has me feeling motivated and inspired. That's why I'm thrilled to present our final award for the DE&I Tech Impact Leader of the Year. This award recognizes a Chief Human Resources Officer, Chief Innovation Officer, or an equivalent leader throughout Georgia who has primary leadership in technology and DE&I programs and projects. Our finalists are Chloe Barzy with Accenture, Dr. Kendra Lewis-Strickland with Georgia Tech, and Adam Moore with Truist. And the winner is Chloe Barzy with Accenture.
Congratulations to all of our winners and finalists. It is my great honor now to introduce Keith Ferrazzi, New York Times bestselling author of Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back and Leading Without Authority.
Adam, thanks so much for a great introduction. I am so thrilled today to be here because there's two things going on that makes this particularly important. First of all, we are at an unparalleled time in business history. We are at a unique inflection point, and there is a powerful opportunity for each and every one of us to consider rejuvenating and rebooting how we show up in organizations as people and as leaders. And this is something that I want to talk to you about today. The second thing I want to talk to you about today is one of the things that has happened in the last 18 months that has made the principle of diversity and inclusion not only a powerful and important principle from the perspective of equality and fairness, but it's come to life as a critical importance around transformation and the movement of organizations into becoming the best organizations possible. Those two things together will make up my remarks with you, and more importantly, the body of research that we have been working on since the pandemic hit in 2020. We have had 2,000 executives and spent $2 million in understanding how does an organization and how does a leader and how does an individual fundamentally leverage this unique inflection point to not crawl out of the rubble and go back to old ways of working, but instead to catapult forward and go forward to work, not back to work. Let me show you a slide that I think might be particularly relevant for this. This is a book, which is the compendium of the research that we have put together over this period of time. And Competing in the New World of Work predominantly focuses on how can each and every one of us leverage and utilize this unique opportunity. Now, I want to share with you very briefly the overview of our insights and research that I think are going to land on you very powerfully. And I want to narrow in on one particular area, which is the word inclusion. Now, overview, maybe I'll give you a quick overview and a sneak peek into this book. What we recognized is that organizations that were able to go through transformation effectively and weren't on the rocks during the pandemic, or organizations that took this time to relook at their entire workforce model, relook at their entire business model, lean on the purpose for which they were founded, and ask the question, is this purpose still relevant? And are we standing up today, creating the kind of an organization that we're proud of in the future? In our own very backyard, one of the things that I was very proud of is the work that we were doing with Delta Airlines, one of the proudest and greatest airlines in the world, who had been transforming the way the travel industry worked, hit a wall, as you can imagine, the loss of up to 90% of revenue in a matter of days. And that organization had made a commitment to not just emerge and survive, but to emerge and thrive into a new world where they're even stronger, although perhaps even smaller at the time, but stronger than they were before. That icon of an organization should be an emblem of what each and every one of us is looking to do. And we're only going to do it is if we redefine our own role as individuals, as new leaders in organizations. The four attributes that we need to be thinking about are foresight, agility, inclusion, and resilience. Let me start with inclusion, which is, to me, the most powerful of them. You know, when we think about the topic of diversity and inclusion, we think about fairness and equity and making sure that we have diverse representation in our organizations, but at the same time that those voices are heard. Well, the problem with inclusion and the opportunity with inclusion is even bigger and grander than just making sure that diverse representation is heard. The power and the opportunity with inclusion is making sure that the diversity of insights that we have sitting around us are used to create bolder solutions. Inclusion, if embraced, can move to a place where we can have greater innovation. And with greater innovation, we can have bolder decisions. With bolder decisions, we can have greater transformation. And every one of us can emerge as the kind of leaders, bringing that kind of inclusive point of view to our organizations. But we've got to listen. We've got to be curious. We've got to embrace the fact that there's a bunch of people sitting in a room, and very often in the past, we wouldn't even hear their voices. Now, we know this for a fact because I have been coaching high-performing teams like the one at Delta Airlines for many, many years. And in our coaching of teams, just take one of the areas, candor, which is the willingness of a group of people to have a full voice, to be courageous in the room, to speak boldly in a room, even when it's risky to do so. Now, that is the opposite of conflict avoidance. That is the opposite of the kind of politeness where we only talk about things candidly when we leave the room and walking down the hall. Where in this past year, we couldn't afford that. The crisis was such that we had to have a full voice in the room to be able to deal and pivot and make amends for all the things that were going on in the marketplace that we had to adapt to. So inclusion became our savior. Hearing people's points of view became the possibility of being able to adapt. And that's why inclusion is right up against agility, because to be an agile organization and to be agile leaders, we've got to embrace inclusion. We've got to listen to other people's points of view. When we do a stand-up at the end of a sprint, and we're sitting here in a scrum or a discussion, unfortunately, in too many organizations, people's full voices aren't heard. How can we be an agile organization if we don't have insights coming from all vantage points so that we can adapt? At the end of every sprint that we may be doing in an agile process, we need to be hearing candor and courage. And again, if we don't embrace inclusion in our organizations, we won't be able to adapt and pivot to the marketplace shifts and changes that are happening. Now, foresight is another example. It was interesting. The organizations during the pandemic that thrived are the organizations that listened. They were the organizations, in fact, we documented one particular organization, which was Lockheed Space, that went fully virtual in February. They weren't on their heels on March 13th calling the CIO and saying, we're closing things down, everybody, go back to their homes, figure it out. These individuals had recognized in December, and why? Because they used their meetings to listen. They had a process by which they on a monthly basis, these organizations had listening posts. What are the risks we're hearing in the marketplace? What are the risks we're hearing in competition? What are the risks we're hearing in macroeconomic policy, et cetera? What are the opportunities we're hearing? And there was a small portion of the agenda where everybody's risks and everybody's opportunities are assessed. And as a result of that, there was a decision to move some of these issues over to some form of an assessment process, and then to maybe even move it into planning. As a result, Lockheed Space, they recognized there was a challenge coming down the pike back in December. They actually went fully virtual in February. And as a result, they didn't have all of the struggles and the challenges that so many other organizations had, which is supplying, the critical products and masks and computers and et cetera that everybody else was struggling with getting their hands on. All of these issues, including, by the way, I'll come to resilience. We hit a wall in 2020 where we had more frustration, fatigue, fractured political environments than we've ever seen. But the teams that held together were the teams that had each other's backs. They were the teams that gave a damn about each other. They were the teams that cared about each other's energies, that lifted each other up. And there's a word that we created and identified. When we saw those teams, we knew that they were something special. They weren't just collaborating. They were what we call co-elevating. It's a commitment for a team of individuals to go higher together. It's a commitment for a team to have a point of view that this is our mission, but we're equally committed to each other achieving that mission, where we're crossing the finish line together. Now, it's interesting because every element of what it takes to be a leader of the future comes back to you as an individual, whether you're a leader or a leader without authority, meaning a leader that you want to see your organization act differently. You want to see the team you're working on be different. That makes you a leader. A leader is something that is self-defined. We don't need a title. We don't need authority to lead. In this past year, people who stepped up were leaders, and it was about them making a decision to lead. And once you make a decision to lead, once you make a decision to change the world around you in the organization that you're in, once you make that decision, then you're making a decision to invite other people onto a movement of change. And again, you don't have to have a titled authority to do it. You just have to have a vision. Think about the great movements and the great leaders in our world and in our society. Martin Luther King didn't have a title. Gandhi didn't have a title. These individuals moved and they shaped the world around us because they had a point of view and they co-created and invited other people in to the movement to make the change occur. That's what you have the possibility of doing in your organization. Now, I want to very quickly give you an overview of what that would look like as a formula. Alternatively, I believe that this wonderful organization that we're here a part of today, TAG, is going to be contributing and donating some of the books that are the outgrowth of the research that we've been doing, competing in the new work world that I mentioned to you earlier. But let me give you a quick rundown and a summary. Number one, I want each of you to land this opportunity in this inflection point. Where do you see an opportunity to make a difference in the organization that you sit in? I don't care if you're a brand new leader out of a college, and I don't care if you're a CEO of a massive institution. You have the opportunity to define a mission and to invite people to follow, right? Now, what I want you to recognize is the humility of what I'm talking about. It's not that you're waiting for a position of authority and dictating to people how they should and what they should do to show up. You are creating a mission and inviting people to co-create with you. That's what leadership is in this new world. It's a world of humility. It's a world of open invitation to the movement that you're creating. I always say that the first person you invite into your team, you're inviting them into their team. I use the example as well when I was a young man at Deloitte. I had heard the CEO say, someday we'll be at par with the likes of McKinsey, and Accenture. Well, we were at the lowest of what was called the Big Eight at the time. But what I did was I decided to be that leader without authority. I decided to go out and I decided to do a research project identifying what were the best practices of these great other professional services institutions. And I documented it in a dossier of their best practices. I then served that up to the CEO of Deloitte. That was my earned permission to begin to work with that individual, the CEO, his name was Pat LeConto, to think about the future of marketing. And he was blown away at my initiative. Your ability to be a leader is tied to your ability to have initiative. Now, on my way to having that conversation with the CEO, I talked to my manager. I said, here's something I'm working on. Could you help me with it? And I talked to my manager's boss, which was the partner that we were working with. And I said the same thing. I'm working on this project. Could you work with me a little bit and get your insight? By the time I was bringing this up to the CEO, I had my boss and my boss's boss fingerprint in it so that they were being celebrated for their initiative and their ingenuity. Yes, I was the protagonist. I was the individual kicking it off, but I was bringing these individuals along and I was elevating them. I was earning permission to lead by virtue of celebrating the people that I was inviting into the work with me. So your ability to think about being an agent of transformation, being a movement leader in your organization has to do with you having a vision and also recognizing who the team is that has nothing to do with who reports to you, nothing to do with who you report to. It has to do with who do you need to achieve the mission at hand. And that is your team. And then the next question is, how do you lead that team? You lead that team through co-creation. You lead that team not by dictating what you think is the answer. You show up with never anything more than 30% of an idea of where we're going. That dossier I wrote was just the start of a conversation. And you humbly put it out there as the start of a conversation. And you invite people in to mold it and massage it and work with it and move it forward. The wonderful thing about being in a world of hybrid work today, where we have the ability to snap our fingers and have hundreds of people, dozens of people being able to join a meeting, break them into breakout rooms, ask them a question, have them open a SharePoint document or a Google Doc and add to and contribute to our questions at hand, come back in, have debates. We are in a world where we can have the broadest and most inclusive dialogue than we've ever had before. If we're still sitting back in old school town meetings, one-way broadcasting out to people, conversations and communications, we are so missing the opportunity of the world that we're living in today. We're living in an abundant world where inclusion means innovation, and your ability to open up and invite people in to co-create is your mark of whether you're a leader for the future. Now, these are the attributes that we have studied for 20 years of high-performing teams. I've coached these attributes of high-performing teams in some of the great organizations and some of the great organizational turnarounds, working with CIOs and working with CEOs of some of the most powerful companies whose brands you know well, helping them move from being where they were stuck and mired in stagnancy or a lack of growth, or even in bankruptcy in some instances in the automotive industry, and coming together as a co-elevating team with higher degrees of candor where people lean in and they are curious with what each other has to say. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of candor that I often see sometimes in the South, and I'm just joking a little bit here, bless her heart kind of candor. I'm talking about the kind of candor where people won't let each other fail, where you have to have a voice and you have to share your criticism because you care enough about the mission, but you also care enough about each other's success. High-performing teams and high-performing leaders are the same thing. In other words, we talk a lot about leadership competencies, but leadership competencies have to be met with team competencies. Let me give you an example. If you're a leader and you're taught to be a great leader, but your team doesn't openly discuss and challenge each other in the room comfortably, then you're a mediocre leader. Inclusiveness and the ability to get people's voice in the room and get people to challenge each other, you as a leader have to be able to create that kind of safe psychological space for conflict that's managed effectively. Quiet conversations behind people's backs in the hallway, that is not high degree professional behavior. If we're going to have a bold and inclusive, a diverse and inclusive, and a bold and innovative culture, then we as leaders have to create that psychological space. So candor becomes such a critical area of that. But by the way, as you see down below, the attributes of high-performing teams, including lifting each other's energy up, right? Being responsible for each other's energy, having bold relationships with each other, caring intimately about each other in an authentic enough way that, again, it's not just lovely acquaintances that we talk about behind each other's backs, but people we give a damn enough about that we're going to call out in the room what we're worried about and concerned about, right? Real vulnerability, real transparency. That is critical in transformative organizations. And if you can be the kind of individual that brings that to teams, it is game-changing in your career. The work that we have done over 20 years and what I'm talking about here and what we've seen in the book that I was talking about earlier, the average team, look at Candor, for instance, the average team is 2.4 on a scale of 0 to 5. And that's answering a question is, are we bold and can we challenge each other in the room when it's risky to do so? 2.4. Well, what we found was that by applying these practices, these tools that I'm talking about, I'm going to show you a few more, by applying these tools and making this recommitment, the social commitment of co-elevation among a team, we can get to a 4.4. And that green, those set of attributes, that's what makes an organization worthy of transformation. Now, as I mentioned, candor is so important. Here's a particular practice. We document what we call high return practices. A high return practice is a practice that we see in our research, and then we put it to use in our coaching. And by virtue of seeing how it moves the needle on outcomes, we then document it as a practice that has a high return. One might have called it a best practice, but we actually measure it. So we want to distinguish it as being something we know has a high return on investment. Bulletproofing. Instead of doing report outs or at the end of a sprint, have somebody give their sprint report and then push a button. If you're in a remote world, push a button and have everybody go into breakout rooms of 2 and have them open a SharePoint document or a Google Doc and have them answer 3 questions about the sprint report that they just heard or the report out of some sort. What are the challenges that we're seeing that person might be missing? What innovations could we offer that individual? And what offers of support or help would you give them? Now, the benefit of this kind of thinking in the breakout room is that in small groups of 2, you have high psychological safety. People say what they're thinking. You don't have the conflict avoidance. You have them write it in. Now you come back into the room. Now you've got the kind of culture that we all are looking for in our organizations. Now, you might be asking yourself, what if I'm not the leader? You can still make a recommendation that this is a high return practice that could be tried. Just because you don't officially have the title of leader of your team doesn't mean that you can't make a recommendation of some of these practices to the official leader of your team. Once again, go back to that kid, happened to be me when I was a kid at Deloitte, who took on a leadership role without the authority, just through initiative. That is your job. If you, you want to shift the culture of your organization, if you want to be an agent of transformation, if you want to lead a movement in the world around you, then you've got to take the initiative. You've got to take the initiative. Ultimately, what I want a co-elevating team to be, and this is not, again, it doesn't have to be a people to report to you. It's your posse. It's the team of people that you're working with to achieve change in your organization or in your life for that matter. You've got to go on this shared, humble development journey together. And I call this journey, as I said, a co-elevating journey. You're going to commit to the mission and you're going to commit to each other. And part of that is also opening up the trust of a team. So opening up the trust, I call it porosity. A sponge is porous, right? This glass is less porous, doesn't absorb. You want to make people absorptive to your message. And the way one goes about doing that, making people absorptive to your message, is making sure that you show up authentically. There's a wonderful example I call a personal professional check-in. If you could even make a recommendation, this is something you do back in your team, that you say to your leader, let's do a personal professional check-in. Let's take 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the beginning. Let's have everybody just share what's going on in your life, sweet and sour, that you might be willing to share, or what's going on personally or professionally that people are struggling with. What we're looking for is we're looking for people to open up vulnerably and invite each other in, because it's with that, as I showed earlier, it's with that kind of relationship strength, right? And supportment of energy and supportment of development. It's with those soft elements of caring about each other that we get the kind of collaboration, the candor, the accountability. The hard stuff comes on a foundation of a strong foundation of those soft leadership elements. Now, this is what it feels like, the tension, the grind, the support that you get when a group is tightly working together to achieve something. And ironically, that's called a scrum, similar to our agile process, a scrum of working together tightly to move the ball in the right direction. Now, a lot of people say, hey, listen, you don't understand the organization I work with. This is difficult for me. The reality is, it's always difficult. If you're going to be a movement leader, if you're going to change, the nature of the organization that you live in, it's got to be on you, right? Like I said, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, they didn't stop. They took the initiative. They found their consortiums. They bumped up against walls, but they said, look, that may be a wall, but to me, it's just a market force. I'm going to work around it. I'm going to get over it. We're going to dig under it. That needs to be your commitment. If you want to be exceptional as a leader, if you want to transform the world around you, you've got to be willing to not be a victim to the world around you. I often recount this story. I have 2 foster children in my family, and my youngest boy is African American. And when he and I talk about the world he's living in, which is a very different world, thank God, than the world that I was brought up in southwestern Pennsylvania at the time, I often worry about his prejudgment of what does it mean to be a foster child who was, it was only taken into a family at the age of 12, our family. Otherwise, he was in 20 different homes as a kid, right? And his fear and his scarcity is really not about being a Black child, but instead it's about being parentless. And that's what he sees in himself. And I say to him, I said, listen, Daniel, the thing that we have to all recognize is that, yes, prejudice will hold us back. But the greatest prejudice that's going to hold us back is the prejudgment that we have of ourselves. Do we belong? Will they accept us? Right? The lion's share of individuals that we ended up getting held back by is not by our willingness to speak boldly, to take the initiative, to stop acting as victims. We've got to take responsibility for managing and moving relationships forward that we live in. Listen, I may sit here looking like an elite white male. I also happen to be a gay man. As a gay man, I grew up in an era where it was unspeakable, where my own religious beliefs were at conflict with who I was as an individual, where when I was early on in my Deloitte days, there was no sense of equality as a gay man in that organization. At the time, of course, that's very different today. But I actually heard my mentor and my boss say out loud, well, if we ever found out there was a gay man about to be partner, we wouldn't make him partner, right? That was the prejudice that I was facing in that organization. But Pat became my mentor. Pat, ultimately, I did come out to Pat. But in that right of coming out to Pat, he saw me for who I was, not of his own prejudices. And had I heard those things and backed down and not allowed myself to become the leader that I knew I deserved to be, independent of what other people thought of my sexual orientation, we've got to not allow anything to hold us back. We've got to step up. We've got to move forward. We've got to serve ourselves and by serving the people around us. And by serving the people around us first, we get the right to serve ourselves and our own careers. Listen, I learned, and by the way, there's nothing more at hand today than the value of hybrid work to embrace this kind of inclusiveness. We can all show up on an equal playing field, in a hybrid and remote work environment like never before on a global basis. I learned a lot from my mother. That's my mom. And she had a group of ladies she called the Card Club Girls. And those Card Club girls, they used to play cards together every single month for 45 years. They got together and played cards. Now, that group of ladies, when my dad was unemployed, as he was very often, I grew up in a poor Pittsburgh steelworking family in the 70s, which is the crash of the steel industry. When the steel industry was crashing around us, those women cooked extra and brought it home so that my mom could say to my dad that she found a way to stretch a nickel, but actually put food on the table so we didn't have to eat welfare cheese. Those group of ladies sat on one of my aunt's beds a couple of days before she passed away, held her hand, played cards with her, and said goodbye. And when my dad died, that group of ladies made sure my mom got out of the house every single day, until she was ready to get out of the house on her own. That's coelevation. I was blessed to know that my mother had that in her life, but I asked myself, do I have that in my life? And have I built that as an architecture in the relationships that I have as a leader in the team that I work with? And that's your opportunity. Who are your co-elevators? And sometimes, even in the case of Pat LaCanto, they may be people that you don't expect it to come from looking very differently. And the prejudgments we have of these people in advance, we can't be victimized by our own fears and concerns. We've got to embrace the people around us. We've got to lead with or without authority. We've got to create the new work world that we're wanting to live in the future, not crawling out and going back to work. I hope this was helpful in such a short period of time. And I hope that the motivation and some of the inspiration is coupled with some very distinct practices that you can use. Many more, of course, available in the new book that you can get, Competing in the New World of Work. But in the meantime, I would just say, pick that mission for yourself. Start identifying one or two new members of the team, not your team, but of the team, and begin to go on that journey and build that movement for yourself. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Roy Hadley. Along with Stacey Hagan, I co-chair TAG's Social Justice and Equity Task Force. I'm joined here today with Ron McMurtry, who serves on the TAG board and as a fellow member of the task force. The task force was founded in the summer of 2020, following the death of George Floyd and all of the social unrest that erupted across our nation. TAG's leaders recognized the need to take action and form this task force to define the unique role that TAG could play to advance social justice and equity.
So, along with a group of committed leaders, we began meeting to discuss the enormity of this challenge and quickly realized that it'll take many people and organizations all doing their part to end systemic racism. So we turned our attention to defining our part of the solution. We needed to ensure an understanding by defining a few terms and guidelines through which we guided our work. When we say social justice, we're referring to fair and just relations between the individuals and the society measured by the distribution of wealth for personal advancement and social privileges. We didn't invent this definition, but we adopted it to clarify our purpose.
We also adopted guiding principles that anchored the very work that we do. These principles ensure that diverse groups have equitable access to resources and opportunities that they are welcomed and enabled to participate in as a basic human right. Even with this clarity of purpose, we saw the need to focus our efforts to have a meaningful impact. Therefore, we chose as our initial mission to enable social justice and equitable advancement for people of color in the workplace.
TAG's leadership at all levels have endorsed this initial focus on race. We believe that addressing issues of racial inequities is the priority of now, and we maintain an intent to expand the focus in the future. Our actions to date fall in three distinct areas. First, we're demonstrating leadership in ensuring a diverse, inclusive membership and leadership within TAG, and committing that our policies and programs reflect this rich diversity. I'm proud of the progress we've made to date, and we're eager to continue these efforts. We've made a concerted effort to ensure our board and its 60 members represent the face and interests of our diverse tech community across Georgia. This is a commitment across the whole of TAG, including our societies and our programming. The presenters and topics addressed at Converge 2020, this Converge today, and the most recent Georgia Technology Summit are great examples of this focus in action.
Second, we seek to play a role in increasing the number of people of color in leadership positions in Georgia's tech community. Remember, TAG has over 30,000 members, 26 professional societies, 5 statewide chapters, and about 1/3 of TAG members represent founders and C-level leaders. We are uniquely positioned, therefore, to partner with this powerful group to impact meaningful advancement for people of color in the tech community in Georgia. This is evident with the efforts of TAG's DE&I Society. This diverse group of practitioners has progressed an agenda in several ways, including supporting hate crimes legislation, essentially advocating that Georgia join other states with this very important legislation, working with TECNA, the National Association of Tech Associations, to align on policies that propel social justice and economic equality, and driving DE&I across all of TAG societies. Finally, we will focus the strength of our ecosystem to connect small African-American owned and led businesses to funding resources and opportunities for business growth, providing mentoring and support for leadership and business development throughout. In support of our immediate mission, we will advance social justice for people of color in the workplace in the following ways. First, ensuring Black tech entrepreneurs fully participate and equitably participate in Georgia's growth economy with unimpeded access to resources and opportunities equivalent to non-Black entrepreneurs. Second, ensure the tech industry workforce in Georgia reflects the overall available workforce, with Blacks proportionately represented in the tech industry. And third, ensure that Black tech professionals advance into managerial and senior leadership positions, achieving representation in these ranks, commensurate to their demographic representation.
To further support of this mission and the tasks Roy just outlined, we're establishing a program lead, and along with our member organizations and the business community, we're currently working to underwrite this position. We believe focusing our mission is the primary path to impactful progress. We'll continue to look for meaningful ways for TAG and its members to have a substantial impact in support of the guiding principles we just outlined and our overall mission. We have big ideas for what we can accomplish, and working and leveraging the strength of TAG is our purpose and our approach. Roy and I appreciate the opportunity to share our progress and our plans, and invite you to contact either of us and learn how you can get involved in this important work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to today's main stage panel on social justice and equity. On behalf of TAG and Converge Planning Committee, thank you for joining us. I hope you're enjoying today's programming. My name is Tiffany Gilbert, and I lead Accenture's Innovation Hub here in Atlanta. In this role, I see how the power of bringing diverse perspectives and experiences to our work every day drives innovation, creativity, and more. Beyond diversity, making space for bold and new ideas by truly including diverse voices only enhances our ability to create meaningful experiences and connections with the world around us. Before I introduce today's panelist, I wanted to share a video our team helped create in partnership with the Smithsonian. We are passionate about collaborating with our communities to promote equity, fight racism and bigotry, and create opportunity. One way we're doing this is by helping the museum amplify their exhibits and experiences for a global audience, with a heavy emphasis on digital transformation and accessibility to increase the awareness and understanding of African American life and contributions. This video, titled Why We March, was created in celebration of the anniversary of the historic March on Washington, which in 1963 brought together more than 25,000 people advocating for racial justice. It explores the role of marching in social justice reform through photography of the museum's collection and illustrates more than 50 years of community activism and protest movements of the racial and social justice and equality in the United States. Please play the video.
Why do we march?
Marching is a sign of solidarity.
It reflects a community whose voices and bodies come together
to demand recognition and the promises of democracy.
As Frederick Douglass once said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress.
No progress.
Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing the ground, rain without thunder and lightning, the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Power concedes nothing.
Power concedes nothing
without a demand. Although it might seem that history and time make little progress, movements for democracy and equality always move toward a more perfect union, with wins both big and small along the way. A march carries calls for justice, through messages that move from hearts that feel compassion to hands that take action, from voices on the ground to game changers and policymakers. The cycle continues moving from individuals and communities into the history and future of generations. Why do we march?
We march for peace.
We march for justice.
We march for equality.
And with a power like thunder, lightning, and the roar of many waters, we march for progress and change. As Dr. Martin Luther King told us,
we cannot walk alone.
And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. So, why do you march?
Why We March emphasizes the importance of mobilizing communities around the idea to incite action. It's about resistance. It is recognizing someone's voice or presence, airing and recognizing those grievances, and letting people know that they are not alone in this fight. Conversations like we're having today are also key to creating change, idea sharing, increasing our understanding, and renewing our commitment to march forward towards progress for all. So let's meet today's panelists, who are the leaders in driving change.
Hello, and thank you again for joining us for the Social Justice and Equity stage. And I have with me today some amazing leaders. We have Ms. Ashley Black, who's the Director of Equity for Delta Airlines. We have Hamid Arjaman, who's the Vice President of the Consort Institute at Emory and Clark Atlanta. We also have Mr. Maurice Jones, the President and CEO of 110. Thank you for joining us today. And then we also have the esteemed President of Clark Atlanta University, my dear friend, Dr. George French. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And so we have a very dynamic conversation that we want to have relative to the problem, the solution, and the national strategy. So I'm going to kick it off, and I have a question for my dear friend, Dr. French. So my question is, well, first a statement. I know that you are an esteemed president with 17 years of experience as a president of an HBC university. You're driving change at an amazing pace in the HBCU community. You're very intentional about connecting with the corporate community, but yet you're still facing some challenges as an HBCU president and with Black talent. Can you tell us what challenges are you facing right now that's keeping you up at night?
Well, one of the challenges, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to serve on this panel with these esteemed panelists. Thank you all so much. Good to see you always, my friend. So what keeps us up at night is we consider the workforce alignment with academia. And it's a great celebration to have a student matriculate at your institution for 4 years and they receive this great liberal arts education. But it's a disappointment when they go to the marketplace and they're prepared but not prepared for what the marketplace has to offer at that time. So what we have to focus on is being very intentional in aligning our curriculum with the needs of the marketplace and not being so tied to, well, we are a 4-year liberal arts institution and that's it. But if Google is saying to me, well, I'm not really interested as much in the 4-year degree as I am in the individual being able to do the job that I have available. So we have to find a variant of one or the other. They are not in diametric opposition. We have to prepare our students. We can prepare liberal arts education, that's fine. But what about when you go to McDonald's and everyone there used to be teenagers and now they're senior citizens, and you go to Walmart, it's the same thing. If those retirees from one career could come to the university and pick up the skills set, all they want to work is another 5 years doing some specialty that they were certified for. So we have a large population for which that need is there. So the academy, we have to be flexible to the needs of the marketplace, listen, follow technology as the thought leaders within that space.
Awesome. I like that answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
I like that answer. You're spot on. You know, there's opportunity out there right now for us to be open, right? Open to change, open to the demands of the business, open to what the marketplace or the corporate community is in need of.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
I'm turning it over to my friend Ashley.
I mean, I know, Dr. French speaks of some real challenges, and I would love to hear from you as a talent provider with Consort, what you all are doing to address some of these challenges and partnering with Clark Atlanta.
Well, we saw that fourth generation the technology revolution is changing the entire marketplace. And things are moving much faster. And there is much higher demand from the corporate world as far as the talent. Then even though we were very involved in degree programs, we felt that we might need to create other avenues for other people that might not have the privilege of time or the finances to be able to participate in the great job market, especially when we see situations like what McKinsey report in 2019, in November 2019, they came up with a report that they were talking about 4.5 million African American jobs is going to be eliminated by 2030. That was in 2019, and then we saw what happened in the COVID time. I mean, what we were predicting that is going to happen, we saw a preview of that. Then it is absolutely necessary to create other avenues, other programs. What we did, we started our program in the Great Recession, when we had 12% unemployment. And we created a program because at that time, the fact that we worked with the corporate executives, they told us that the job availability at that time was health information technology. There were 5,000 jobs in health information technology in Atlanta, but there were not many qualified people to be able to do that. Then we created a program that in 3 months, actually 12 Saturdays, people could come and get trained and get these jobs. Now, what I didn't recognize was very shortly after we started the program, we find out 100% of the students were unemployed. I didn't know that. And then it's such a pressure on you, because now you feel these people who really cannot afford the money, they trust you and giving you this money with the hope of jobs. For that reason, we really start learning. We find out specifically that this is not about just high tech. This is not about just teaching them some skill. You really need to look at the entire person. You need to look at things holistically. If you want people to be successful, really look at where they are, and you need to meet them where they are. You cannot ask them to meet you where you are, because you really don't know you don't understand their issues and problems. Then what we figured out was, if you want to make them successful, understand their obstacles and remove those obstacles. When you do that, they really become successful. Recently, we just did a program 2 years ago, before the COVID was starting. We wanted to train 20 single moms. And for the first time, we wanted to train these people who didn't have degrees for the first time. Just bringing 20 single moms, and the requirement was either they need to be unemployed or they need to make less than $36,000. That was the requirement. However, also our requirement was to make sure that everybody gets a job, and majority of them get jobs over $60,000. And again, in 3 months, we trained them in cybersecurity. However, we made sure that we paid for their food, we paid for their transportation, and we took care of the childcare. Because if somebody is hungry, if they don't have transportation, if they have to worry about their children, they really don't have peace of mind to learn. It doesn't matter what you're teaching them. You really need to have that peace of mind. Then what we find out is you really cannot do this stuff alone. You need partnership. You need teams. Because without them, you can't do it. It's really not just about hard skills. It's about really understanding where they are, bringing partners in, and trying to work together, and making sure that nobody is left behind. And that's the reason that we have been successful, and we were very fortunate that Dr. French asked us to create a Center for Workforce Development at Clark Atlanta. And we really are delighted that now we have an opportunity to work with him, because his vision is basically aligns with our vision. We're trying to really align ourselves with the corporate world and trying to see how we would be able to accomplish what we want to do. And then in the process, we met this gentleman. And we got so excited. All our problem solution was right here, and we didn't know. And now he's going to tell us, how we're going to be successful with having him in our team.
Yes, Maurice, we would love to hear about, the wonderful things that the 110 Coalition is doing at a national level and really focusing on Black talent and addressing some of these same challenges.
I won't say I have all the answers, so I appreciate that. But I am excited. I do think that what you're hearing is exactly the kind of partnership that 110 is constructed to be a part of and to help scale. So 110 is a coalition now of about 60 companies. Including, I got to give a shout out to Delta, one of our founding companies, and Ed has been from day one passionate about this. But the coalition has come together and they've picked a North Star. That North Star is to hire and promote 1 million Black talent who don't yet have 4-year degrees into family-sustaining careers and jobs over the next 10 years. So we've got 60 companies. They're putting family-sustaining jobs on the board all over the country. They range from companies like Delta and IBM and Walmart and Cisco and JP Morgan Chase, the whole gamut. And what they're doing, it's a handful of things that the companies have committed to. One, put jobs on the table that don't require 4-year degrees, that pay family-sustaining wages. Two, and this is even harder work, really, look at their jobs and remove a 4-year degree requirement where it's not related to the skills necessary to doing the work. So move to the point that you were making, Doctor, move to a skills-based approach to hiring, a skills-based approach to promoting folks. 3, the companies have come together and they have created a community of practice, so they're learning from one another. Some companies are further along the journey in skills-first hiring. Why not learn from them, right? And so they're learning how to do skills-first hiring, how to re-credential their jobs, how to do apprenticeships, and they're learning this together and collaborating. Really importantly, they've said, okay, we're gonna do this for a decade. I joke with people all the time. There's a reason why we don't call this 1-1. It's 1-10 for a reason, right? If you're gonna transform companies and their practices and their cultures, if you're gonna partner with Black talent and their families and literally go with them along a journey, a trajectory that is about mobility, if you're going to change the country, you cannot do that in 1 year. Right? That's right. And so they've committed to a 10-year journey. And then finally, they're actually putting money, resources into the coalition so the coalition can do its work. And to the point you were making, the way that the work is being done is by building and scaling that ecosystem, right? It's companies, it's educational institutions, it's talent, it's wraparound support. And the idea is to scale that and to do it both virtually. So we've got a tech platform that you can do all this matching that you're talking about. You can do it all virtually. And then we're doing it on the ground in key markets like Atlanta and New York and Chicago and LA, building and sustaining relationships. But it's just like you said, this is a team sport.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And so I'm going to ask you this question that I'm always asking, right? Because you're sitting right next to a HBCU president whose job is to make sure that he produces 4-year degrees. So what would you say to the rest of the world that's watching right now about that subject? Are you trying to totally disregard the 4-year degree?
Oh, no, to the contrary. We need way more 4-year degrees than we currently have, so let's get more. Right. The point we're making is, look, when it comes to, well, let me give you a data point. Right now, today, and I said this earlier to a group, if you look at family-sustaining jobs, if you look at jobs that pay $60,000 and above, right? On paper, right now in our country, 79% require a 4-year degree. If you look at jobs that pay $40,000 and above, on paper right now, 71% of them require a 4-year degree. If you look at Black talent, ages 25 and above, 76% of us do not have a 4-year degree. We can't have one pathway to the middle class. Because when we do, guess who gets hurt the most and the quickest? So no, what I'm saying is there's got to be multiple pathways to earning your way into the middle class. And oh, by the way, what we're saying is there shouldn't be a gateway 4-year degree requirement to a job. But the home run is one who gets into a journey with a certificate or a license or an associate's degree and gets his or her 4-year degree along the way as well. So no, these work together. I want to make sure that we don't create the impression that you got to choose one or the other. No, black talent, just like all other talent, need both. They need multiple pathways. That's what we're saying.
So, Dr. French, we talked about that too, right? So I want you to speak to that because, they are saying that it should be both things. So there is a misconception, but you two are aligned. So can you share a little bit about the thought process that maybe other HBCU leaders may be thinking as it relates to that? Because I think, to his point, that the demands for talent right now is serious. It's super, super serious. And there's an opportunity for us to, as educators, right, to make sure that that on-demand talent is incorporated somewhere in the near future as you graduate talent.
And that's exactly the trajectory of Clark Atlanta University. So many institutions. As I traveled here, I passed the beautiful building, NCR, National Cash Register. And my children really wouldn't know what a cash register is, right? But that company diversified, and they're doing quite well, although cash registers are a thing of the past. We have to do the same thing within higher education. Again, we have to meet the needs of the marketplace, and where we have to draw the line and make sure, however, that we still do protect the liberal arts education.
That's right.
And the benefits of it. Absolutely. Because while you may need certification and particular skill set for this one job, liberal arts education is really not about being able to get a job. That's where the conversation of liberal arts education will allow you to opportunities of social mobility. So you started off doing this, but once you're tired of that, you have critical thinking skills, which would allow you to analyze and research the marketplace and determine what you want to do next. So they're not divergent points of view. As a matter of fact, even entrepreneurship is huge. Clark Atlanta University, we just received a multi-million-dollar grant to be a regional financial center for entrepreneurship and innovation, because our students just don't want the strict liberal arts education only, but they want to get the skills from accounting and marketing to be able to develop their own business and to create generational wealth. So there are, as Maurice stated, there are multiple pathways, and the fact of the matter is, we have been central thus far since 1865 for Clark Atlanta University and so many HBCUs. The bottom line is the product of HBCUs would be PhDs, doctors of all sorts, lawyers, educators. The plethora of everything that goes on within society is what we produce. And HBCUs produce the black middle class. That's factual. We produce the black middle class. Maurice and I agree that that's the case, but he suggests that, but let's not have one path to that middle class. Right. Let's have several paths, which makes absolute sense.
And let me just add to that. We also believe that if we fix this issue of access to living wage careers and jobs for those without four-year degrees in the workplace, we will also be benefiting Clark Atlanta graduates and Morehouse graduates, Spelman that you can't fix one without impacting positively all of them. Right. So this journey ultimately is one that is collective. We're not going to let people try to divide us. We're just not going to let it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because we're in this. This is part of a long journey that we've had in this country, and we're going to stay committed and stay together and conquer this mountain together.
That's right.
Something that I love that you all have all spoken about is, with the wraparound services, talking about mentoring. And I think mentoring is so critical, whether you're a product of a four-year degree or whether you're the product of skills first hiring. And so, Maurice, you've shared a personal story before that I really enjoyed about your experiences early in your career with mentoring, and I would love to hear a little bit more about the importance of that and how it changed the trajectory of your career.
It's a life changer, and I'll give you a little story. Just don't laugh at me. So my preface is I'm a country boy from a town of 1,200. In fact, I got a daughter who teases me that her school is larger than my hometown, which is about right. But I graduated and went off to the big city of New York and got a job, right? Summer job with a big investment house. And, you know, it was a little intimidating for me, right, to go off to New York. In fact, I kept looking up at the buildings. But I'll never forget, I arrived, I did what my grandfather taught me to do and my grandmother taught me to do, which is outwork everybody, right? So I came to work before everybody else, and I went home at night after everybody else. I just worked hard. Well, one night, I was working hard. I was the only one there. My mentor, who was appointed my mentor for the summer, knew it. And so he comes into my office and he shuts the door behind him. And I knew that he wanted to share something with me. And he sits down and he goes, "How's it going?" I said, "Well, you tell me." He said, "You're doing great." He says, "You are working harder than everybody else. People love you." He says, "There's just one thing." I said, "Okay." He said, "We don't wear short sleeve shirts on Wall Street." I had on my best Sunday shirt, right? Yeah. It had a collar and it was short sleeve, and I had a tie on. This was what I knew to be your Sunday best. Yeah. Thank God that this guy took the time to say, that's not the way, that's not the culture you're in right now. No. You bet your last money I went out and got me 3.
I know you did. I know you did.
But that guy enabled me to get a job offer from that firm. Because I could have busted my butt for the rest of the summer, and people still would have said, "Nah, he doesn't quite know how it works." So, long-winded way of saying you cannot replace mentorship. It just changes your life.
That's it.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, as I have spent some time looking at the 110 website, and I shared with Ashley that we are in a moment in time right now. It's exciting, but it's requiring a lot of change. And sometimes that change is challenging, and it is going to take 10 years, right? But I'm curious to know, how did you guys come up with 10 years? Why do you really think it's going to take 10 years?
Well, 10 years is a metaphor for it's not going to take 10 months. You're not going to be done in 10 months, right? You could have picked 10, you could have picked 15, you could have picked 20. The bottom line is we wanted people to stay at this work long enough to really change systems, right? So it was the systemic change aspiration that caused us to pick 10 years, right? You've got to, it's not just about hiring at Delta, right? It's about changing the whole bias, some of which is visible, some of which is invisible, right, about the culture in the place. It's about partnering with Black families, changing the lives of, yes, that individual who gets hired or gets promoted, but it impacts his or her entire family, right? And then it's about trying to change our country and to make our country, to take advantage of a moment where our country is stepping back and saying, are we really as good as we think we are? And most folks now, if they are honest, are saying no. But can we be? Yes. And so the notion of 10 years is it takes 10 years if you want to change a system. If you just want to make an announcement and do something that's quick, yeah, you can do that in 10 months. But it was the notion of systemic change takes at least a decade.
Wow. So, and I know I have all these questions, but one thing that with Hamid and the Consort Institute, we obviously do a lot of research, right? And one thing that I know for sure, being in this technology industry, is that many of the jobs today yesterday are no longer going to be available quickly. A lot of them are already gone, and the pandemic exposed that, right? And so we got to get the marketplace, the community, the workplace, what have you, prepared for the jobs of the future. Is 110, really looking at that? A lot of the jobs that we grew up in, that our children will never see again, those jobs are just not relevant anymore. So how will 110, the HBCU community, the talent developers, how are we going to equip the black talent coming into the platform with the skills that they need, so they understand that some of these jobs that they grew up and their parents were telling them that this is what you need to do when you grow up will no longer be there. It's a new day.
Yeah. Two things. One is 110, when it defines the jobs that it's focusing on, we look at four things for the job to count. One is the job has to pay a living wage.
Living wage,
right? Two is that the job cannot require, as a gateway entry point, a 4-year degree requirement. Three is that the job require less than 5 years experience in order for one to be competitive. Four is actually that the job is not going to be automated out of existence in a short period of time. So we're looking at jobs that we know are going to be around for a decade. That's the first thing. But the second piece of it, and this is probably even more relevant, is these are all jobs. This is a demand-driven coalition. So we have real-time jobs coming from the companies, and that the companies are projecting that they will need, that we are trying to fill. So that combination of, it can't be a job that's going to be automated away, but also that it's real. We're not a program searching for jobs, we're actually jobs searching for talent. That's how we hope to get at this issue that you're suggesting.
And I asked this of Dr. French. I asked this of Dr. French and Dr. Wesson. And we're all kind of curious, why is it that there are so many jobs available right now and going unfilled?
You're asking that of me?
Because I know that you have all these leaders talking to you, so you have to have the answer.
There are 10 million jobs unfilled right now. Actually, it's more like 11 million. However, get this. There are 10 million unemployed black people right now. The real question is the match, right? How do you make sure that you're equipping and matching that talent with the jobs, right? So I always tell people, right, it's not that we don't have the talent. There's talent in every community, small, large, urban, rural, black, white. I've seen genius in every, but what's not there is the pathway of opportunity. That's what we have to work on together.
What you think about that, Dr. French?
Yes, I totally agree. As a matter of fact, we at Clark Atlanta University, we are looking at re-engineering. We're looking at bringing students back in, even graduates, if they are in careers that they're not satisfied or if they don't have a career, to ask the question, come back in. Yes, I know you have the bachelor's degree or the master's, even the doctorate perhaps, but here's an opportunity for a company that's coming to town, Apple, Microsoft, and these are the requirements for the jobs that they need. So let us offer you at no charge, because you've already paid your tuition and you're my alum. At no charge, we're going to certify you so that you'll be prepared when Microsoft comes to town.
Perfect.
That type of, that's what we're looking.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. You like that, Ashley?
I love it. I love it.
I have a question for you, Ashley, and it's really about Delta and your partnership. Can you share with the tag community in the corporate world. How did you guys get involved? You know, what made you guys decide that you're going to be the site leader for the state of Georgia?
Yes, so we are thrilled to be the city lead, partnering with the 110 Coalition to help build the talent ecosystem in Atlanta, focusing on skills-first hiring approach. And I will tell you, I was sitting here looking at this group and thinking, what other city can do what Atlanta can in the way of partnering and joining together to really make a difference? And so I feel so fortunate as we look, you know, as Delta Airlines, the largest employer in the state of Georgia, and really looking at the opportunities for the skills-first approach and really changing the trajectory for Black talent.
Wow. You have a question?
I would just love to hear from you all. I'll let whoever wants to chime in to do so, but what do you think sets Atlanta apart in the way of really, you know, a community of practice and how we can join arms to make, you know, Atlanta be set apart from a Black talent perspective?
Well, I happen to be also not only president of Clark Atlanta University, but I'm the chair of the Atlanta University Center. Maurice called those names of those institutions rolled off his tongue so smoothly. You must have been a graduate because he said Morehouse.
I'm a wannabe.
Okay. So you've got Morehouse, you have Spelman, you have Clark Atlanta University, you have Morehouse School of Medicine, you have Morris Brown, you have the ITC, which is a seminary there. That's a microcosm of the world. Mm-hmm. Okay. This Atlanta has become, I was speaking with Ambassador Andrew Young recently, and he was speaking about what Washington, D.C. used to be to African Americans. It was the epicenter of all things African American. That has become Atlanta now. If you look at technology, if you look at startups, if you look at higher education, if you look at the film industry, that's now making more movies than Hollywood, Atlanta, Georgia is. And of course, let me just go ahead and put that commercial in, that we have a mass media arts department at Clark Atlanta University. And Spike Lee, although he graduated from Morehouse, he tells everyone he took all of his theater classes at Clark Atlanta. So we have not just the movie industry here, but we have, now that's just the Atlanta University Center. Then you add Emory and Georgia Tech and Georgia State and Kennesaw State. I mean, this is the epicenter for all things great, and I think it's only going to improve. We will have a huge announcement within the AUC. Apple is, they committed $100 million to the racial and equity initiative, and they're going to build a Propel Center. It's called Propel Center. They said it's going to be somewhere within the AUC. I'm not sure yet which campus, but I'll be happy to have it anywhere there. And it's going to bring in people from around the country. On the other side of campus, Microsoft is coming to town. So we're going to have Microsoft on this side and Apple here, epicenter of all things great.
Beautiful.
I think we are out of time. We are out of time. How fast did that go by? So thank you all so much for your time, your insight, your expertise. We will certainly continue this conversation. Larry definitely wants to hear more, and we want to determine where are we going from here. So I think we have a good start. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so our afternoon content sessions are the role of the manager in building a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization, women in the ATL speak DE&I and workforce, diversity in cybersecurity industry, igniting the inclusive workforce, full circle inclusion, and diversity, what it is, facing adversity with optimism and resilience, and integrating tech and well-being.
Before we close, I'd like to call up a few people who've made Converge possible and ask for their reactions to just what we experienced. Maxine, Adam, Roy Hadley, come on up. Let's talk about this. Maxine, let's start with you. What are some key takeaways? I'll put you on the spot first.
I know, right? I tell you, my key takeaway is that it takes a community. And in the African American community, we say it takes a village. And to me, That is really what this is about. I am so proud of you as a leader and your vision for this conference and being open to hear and have a listening session to hear what the HBCU community is saying, what the African American leaders, your DE&I society, and just being open. To me, that's amazing because that doesn't always happen. So for me, I'm taking away your leadership ability to say, I want to add value, I want to hear and listen what's needed, and how the Technology Association of Georgia can help.
Well, Maxine, I'm inspired by your leadership, so I appreciate that. Adam, what are your key takeaways?
Yeah, you know, Larry, it's amazing to me. I have to tell you, I'm a little awestruck today, right? The guests that we've had.
Rightfully so, rightfully so,
These are
yep.
powerhouse leaders in DE&I.
Yep.
But I think what I'd like to say to everybody out there watching us is, if you're just starting the DE&I journey, maybe you haven't started the DE&I journey, and you're listening to all of us talk about it, and you're like, wow, that's a lot, right? And I often tell people, you know, DE&I is kind of like an onion. Once you start peeling it back, you just keep finding another layer after another layer after another layer.
Right.
But we have to start somewhere, right? And that's what I'm hearing from everybody today. We've got to pick a place to start there and start working on it hard. Everything else will come together. And it is, Maxine, it's going to take a village, right?
It takes a
One
village.
group, one person, one organization can't do it all.
That's right.
It's got to be the cumulative efforts of all of us together, locking arms, and making a difference and continuing the conversation forward. And that's what I've heard today is talk about an afternoon and a day full of hopefulness. This has been great.
Yeah.
It's been amazing.
Roy, you're co-chair of our Social Justice and Equity Task Force. We put some real traction. We got some real teeth in that. What are your takeaways from today?
So the takeaways from today, and you know, I'm co-chair along with Stacey Hagan.
Stacey Hagan.
And so just want to give a shout out to Stacey.
By all means.
But I want to just take, my takeaway is that you listen to all the great sessions, you listen to all the great leaders, but my challenge to anybody listening today will be get involved.
That's right.
Get involved. Because it's easy to sit back and hear these great things happening, great plans, great thoughts, but there's an opportunity for everyone to get involved. And so that would be my challenge to everybody and my takeaway. You've heard some great things, you've seen some great opportunities. Pick something, get involved, roll up your sleeves, put on your boots, and you know, pull up your pants, and join us. Join us in this effort, because this is so critical to the success of our communities, but also critical to the success of the greater community and the greater good. And so with that, you know, I'll end it. You give a lawyer a mic, and I can talk all that. You know, and I can keep going. But I think, you know, my thing would be get involved, find something, and really get involved in the effort.
And I think that's a great summary of what we're trying to do at TAG. We know that there's a role for everybody, and everybody has a role. We have a role at TAG, and we're going to make sure that we're doing our part to progress social justice and equity, and make sure that that there are priorities amongst priorities. But we're going to really move the needle forward. And for that, I am grateful for all of your leadership, all of your hard work that you're doing. I can't thank you enough. What a great day. The breakouts, great information. It is going to take all of us. We're not going to do it alone. But there's a role for us, and there's a role. And the more we define our role, the better partner we can be with this whole community. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Can't thank you enough.